Imagine spending trillions of dollars, sending hundreds of thousands of people halfway across the world just to end up exactly where you started, or worse. That's been kind of America's thing for, well, a couple centuries. There's this pattern. The US gets really confident, calls something Operation Freedom, drops in some troops, and a few years later goes, wait, why were we even here? So today, we're going to talk about 10 times the US went to war and absolutely biffed it. Not the noble stuff, not World War II, not the Revolution. We're talking about the oopsie-daisy history lessons. Wars are supposed to have a purpose, defend your country, protect people, maybe gain independence. But often, wars are messy ego contests dressed up as heroic causes. In America, with its global police complex, its we can fix this attitude, and its completely chaotic foreign policy, has written entire chapters of history that, frankly, aged like room temperature milk. So let's count down the top 10 dumbest US wars we actually fought. Number 10, the invasion of Grenada, 1983. This one's short, but almost cartoonish. In 1983, the tiny Caribbean island of Grenada had a coup. Reagan's administration heard the word Marxist and basically went full panic mode. So the US launched Operation Urgent Fury, which sounds like a Mountain Dew flavor, not a military campaign. 7,000 troops, Navy ships, Air Force bombers, sent to overthrow a military government on an island smaller than Detroit. The invasion took 3 days, and the US suffered 19 deaths, mostly from friendly fire. Like, imagine bringing a tank to a bar fight and then tripping over your own shoelace. The operation was widely mocked internationally. Even the British, our supposed besties, were like, you invaded where? But back home, Reagan's approval numbers jumped. Turns out Americans love a short, simple, we win story. Number 9, the Iraq War, 2003-2011. Yeah, the big one. The war that started because of 3 letters, WMD. After 9/11, the US wanted vengeance, and paranoia turned into policy. The Pentagon claimed Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. Spoiler alert, he didn't. America still invaded, calling it Operation Iraqi Freedom, because apparently Operation Oops All Lies was too honest. The war dragged on for 8 years, killed hundreds of thousands of civilians, and destabilized the entire Middle East. It also cost around $2 trillion, money that could have funded universal healthcare or like 1,000 new space programs. In the end, Iraq got rid of Saddam, sure, but it also created a power vacuum that eventually gave rise to ISIS. So if the test was make the world safer, that's going to be a no for me. Number 8, the Spanish-American War, 1898. The one that launched America's short-lived empire phase. Remember when everyone in class learned about the USS Maine and thought, oh yeah, that explosion thing? Yeah, that's this war. The ship blew up in Havana Harbor. The newspapers blamed Spain. America yelled, remember the Maine, and declared war. But later, evidence suggested it might have just blown up on its own. The war lasted just 4 months, and the US walked out with control over Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. Basically America's first expansion pack. It was short, victorious, and wildly unjustified. The result, an entire new mess of colonial problems, including the next war on this list. Number 7, the War of 1812. This one started because Britain was being annoying. They kept stopping American ships and forcing sailors into their navy, because apparently kidnapping was still a maritime hobby. So America said, fine, we'll just invade Canada. And then, Canada politely annihilated them. The US failed to capture any major Canadian city. The British retaliated by marching into Washington and burning the White House. The Treaty of Ghent ended it in a draw, but the only real winner was the song The Star-Spangled Banner, written during the war. So I guess we can thank losing for giving us our national anthem. Still, invading Canada, dumb move. We couldn't even beat a country that apologizes as a reflex. Number 6, the Bay of Pigs, 1961. Okay, this one wasn't technically a war, but it deserves a spot because it's the most awkward military faceplant in US history. The CIA under President Kennedy decided to overthrow Fidel Castro by secretly training Cuban exiles. They landed at the Bay of Pigs and, within 3 days, were completely defeated. The plan basically assumed ordinary Cubans would rise up and help. They didn't. Instead, Castro's forces crushed them, and the whole thing became a global embarrassment. Kennedy later said he'd been handed a plan that was doomed from the start, and he was right. It's what happens when you mix Cold War paranoia with overconfidence and a total lack of basic logistics. It also directly led to the Cuban Missile Crisis the next year. You mess around, and suddenly the world's 10 minutes from nuclear winter. Number 5. The Vietnam War, 1955-1975. If America were a movie franchise, Vietnam is the one critics call the gritty reboot that no one asked for. The US joined the fight to stop communism from spreading in Asia. The fear was the domino effect. If Vietnam fell, the rest of Southeast Asia would follow. But Vietnam had been fighting for independence for decades, first against France, now against the US. It wasn't about ideology, it was about self-determination. For 20 years, America pumped money, troops, and napalm into jungles it barely understood. Entire villages were destroyed. Over 58,000 Americans died. Millions of Vietnamese were killed. And for what? The US eventually pulled out, and Vietnam unified, under communist leadership, the exact thing America tried to stop. It was geopolitics played like a game of Jenga. Pull one wrong piece, and the whole region collapses. To this day, veterans and politicians still argue about what the point even was. But the closest thing to consensus? It was a tragedy disguised as strategy. Number 4. The Philippine-American War, 1999-1902. After liberating the Philippines from Spain, America basically went, "Cool, thanks for the help. Now we own you." The Filipino rebels who thought they were fighting for independence realized they just swapped one colonizer for another, so they fought back, and the US responded with brutal counterinsurgency tactics. Around 200,000 civilians died. Concentration camps, massacres, scorched earth campaigns, all while American newspapers called it teaching them civilization. It's one of the most darkly ironic wars in US history. America claimed to spread democracy by suppressing someone else's. And then, of course, it got downplayed in American textbooks for decades, because nothing kills national pride like admitting you colonized people after declaring yourself the land of the free.
Number 3. Operation Just Cause, 1989. Sometimes the justification for war sounds like a guy trying to win an argument by yelling louder. That's essentially Operation Just Cause. Yep, that's the real name. A war literally branded as Just Cause. In 1989, the US invaded Panama to remove Manuel Noriega, their former ally. You know it's a bad pattern when your ex-dictators keep ending up on your naughty list. The invasion lasted a few weeks, killed hundreds of civilians, and destroyed neighborhoods. Sure, Noriega was arrested and later sentenced for drug trafficking, but the invasion itself violated international law. Even the UN condemned it. The US just shrugged and said, "Yeah, but justice?" It was basically America's way of saying, "We can, therefore we will," which unfortunately describes a lot of our foreign policy. Number 2, the Mexican-American War, 1846 to 1848. This one's less remembered, but massively consequential. It started when the US basically said, "Hey, that border between us and Mexico? Yeah, we think it's somewhere else now." Mexico disagreed. President Polk sent troops into disputed territory. Shots were fired, and suddenly, war. The US absolutely steamrolled Mexico. By the end, America took half of Mexico's land, what's now California, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico. It was victory through opportunism, plain and simple. Even Ulysses S. Grant, who fought in it, called it one of the most unjust wars ever waged by a stronger against a weaker nation. And ironically, the expansion it created led directly to the Civil War, because all that new land reignited the slavery debate. One dumb war accidentally set up an even worse one. Number 1, the Banana Wars, 1898 to 1934. Yes, you heard that right, Banana Wars. Between the late 1800s and early 1930s, the US launched multiple military interventions across Central America and the Caribbean, all to defend American business interests, specifically fruit companies. Companies like United Fruit, now Chiquita, basically had private armies and lobbied the US government to protect their profits. Nicaragua, Honduras, Haiti, the Dominican Republic, American troops landed, occupied, built puppet governments, then left when Wall Street was happy again. Imagine telling soldiers, "You're risking your life for freedom, and also, these bananas have to stay cheap." It's capitalism as foreign policy, and it created a century of instability the region's still dealing with. So when you zoom out, you realize these wars are all connected. Not directly, but thematically. They share the same DNA: inflated fear, bad intelligence, economic greed, or straight-up arrogance.
And almost every one of them ends with the US either apologizing, pretending it didn't happen, or trying to spin it as a lesson learned. The Bay of Pigs shows what happens when hubris beats poor planning. Vietnam shows what happens when stubborn pride beats evidence. The Banana Wars show what happens when profit masquerades as patriotism. And through it all, there's this national myth that America always fights for freedom. But sometimes freedom just means what benefits us right now. There's a reason history keeps looping, because as a country, America has a goldfish attention span when it comes to military lessons. Every generation seems to think their intervention will be smarter, faster, cleaner. But war doesn't work like that. It's chaos with a flag on it. The thing that sticks with me is how often the US has gone to war, not because it had to, but because it could, because no one said no. Grenada, Iraq, Vietnam, the Philippines, they're all chapters in the same long, expensive, we'll fix it experiment, one that almost never goes as planned. And every time we do it, the people who pay the price aren't the generals or the decision makers. It's the soldiers sent to fight and the civilians who just happen to live there. So next time someone says, we need to go in there, maybe pause for a second. Remember, history has receipts. Would you enlist for this mess?